So welcome everyone to CCI Huronia's second Fall Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Sonia Hodis. I'm one of the many directors at CCI Huronia and a condo lawyer as well as your moderator today. Today's webinar, we're going to be talking all about virtual meetings. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, Aaliyah Associates, Bayshore Property Management, Purcell Property Management, Integrity Property Management, and FCS Fire Consulting Services. Thank you once again for the generous support of our sponsors. Because of our sponsors, we're able to offer these webinars free of charge. So again, thank you for your support. All of us on the webinar today and in our chapter appreciate that. So who are we? We are the Canadian Condominium Institute, who is an independent nonprofit organization formed in 1982. We have chapters from across the country and 8 alone in Ontario. CCI Huronia is one of those Ontario chapters. CCI's main objective is education. However, we also advocate for condos, and we represent all those involved in condos, from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all these stakeholders to work together. If you want to benefit from membership in CCI and you're not currently a member, check out one of your local chapters and consider joining today. You can go to the national website, cci.ca, to find a chapter near you. Click on the chapters tab and then on chapters location. CCI National also has a National Resource Center, which has a great deal of material available for condo owners, directors, and professionals related to COVID issues or other condo related issues. You can access that on the cci.ca website as well under the Resource Center tab. Or if you go to CCI Huronia's website, ccihuronia.com, you can get a link to that resource from our website. Don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook, and that's a great way to find out about our upcoming events. You can also always check our website for upcoming events and to register online at ccihuronia.com. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, you can find recordings of those webinars on our website under the Resource Content tab. And especially in light of the topic that we have today, you may want to check out our June 10th webinar if you missed it. That was on electronic meeting and voting bylaws. A couple of reminders, please keep your phones muted and don't unmute yourself during the session. We are recording this webinar, so we want to get the best recording that is available. Also, please keep your camera turned off if you're not a speaker. If you have any trouble with the connection, end the meeting and log in again. And as a last resort, you can always log in by phone and listen, and then you can watch the webinar down the road once we post it to the website. We will be taking live questions from our speakers at the end of the webinar. So you have a couple choices. You can put your questions in the chat box, and we'll be following the chat box. You can also press *9 if you'd like to ask a question at the end of the webinar. That will indicate that you have a question, and I'll be able to unmute you. And if you're logging in by your computer, laptop, or iPad, or your smartphone, if you just open your participants box, which is the 2 heads, and press on the raise hand function, you can raise your hand, and that will indicate that you want to ask a question, and we'll take those at the end of the webinar. Our disclaimer that we need to make sure everybody understands that the information that is being provided today is general information, and since things change very fast and what you need to do in your specific situation is very fact specific, it's important that you contact your professionals for advice. If you are a director and you want to use the protection of Section 37 of the Condo Act, you will need to get an opinion about your specific fact situation from your own professional. This webinar is not intended to provide you with opinions and will not give you the protection under Section 37 of the Condo Act. In addition, because this webinar is being recorded and is likely to be watched at a future date, the information provided in this webinar is current as of October 16th, 2020, and all references to the Condo Act or other legislation is references to Ontario legislation. So we do have some people who are watching us from out of province. Welcome, and we're glad to have you, but just be aware that the legislation being referred to is Ontario legislation. So before we get started with our first speaker, let's just give a little summary of what's happening in the province today as it relates to meetings and our ability to gather. There's been a couple of recent announcements from the government that you are probably have heard of, but if not, want to make sure that you're aware of them. September 19th, the government reduced gathering sizes for the next 28 days to 10 people indoors and 25 people outdoors. That restriction did not apply to events that were being held in staffed businesses and facilities such as banquet halls or convention centers. But then on October 20th, the government announced that for the regions of Ottawa, Peel, and Toronto, which some of you that are watching are from those regions, the gathering sizes with respect to 10 people indoors and 25 people outdoors didn't have an exception for staffed businesses or facilities. And then beginning of October, the government extended the deadline for virtual meetings and electronic voting without a bylaw to May 31st, 2021. That was welcome news for the condo industry, but they did not extend the time frame to hold your AGMs. So you still need to hold your AGMs within 6 months after your fiscal year end, unless you had an AGM that was scheduled between July 25th and August 24th, then you need to hold that by November 21st. So just a couple updates with respect to the, what's going on the government side in Ontario. More than ever, we definitely need to learn about how to do these virtual meetings and what we need to consider, and that's what our speakers are going to be talking to us about today. We're very lucky that we have two condo lawyers with us, Patricia Aaliyah and Nancy Houle, as well as two property managers, Shauna Grant and JJ Folds. So they're going to be talking about the virtual meeting aspect. But before we get into that, we're very lucky today. We have our own Zoom master with us, Casey Farley, and she is going to give us some background in terms of how to work Zoom and what you can do and cannot do in Zoom. So Casey, I'm going to pass it over to you, and I'm going to get your PowerPoint up and help us all become Zoom masters.
That's great. Thanks so much, Sonia. So we're going to go through just some basics for both participants and hosts on some of the tips and tricks on how to use Zoom to the best of your ability for your meetings and for your personal life as well, because that's kind of what things are coming to now. So first we'll start with if you are participating in a Zoom meeting. So one of the questions that we get often is, how do I raise my hand? So to raise your hand, you're going to see your control bar at the bottom of your screen. If it's not there, you just need to move your mouse to activate that bar to pop up there. You'll see that participant, it has the red square around it, the two people. When you click on that, your participant window is going to come up beside you, and you'll see that raise hand feature. It might look different depending on if your host has enabled the nonverbal features or not. It'll either be a word that says raise hand, or you'll see that blue icon with the raise hand. And once you click that, your hand will be up and the host will know that you have something that you want to say, or if you're using it for voting, they'll see that your hand is raised there. Another question is, how do I answer yes or no? So often for voting, you may be asked to answer with a yes or a no. This is similar to the raise hand. You're going to go into your participant window and you'll see the yes, no feature there. Those will only appear if your host has already enabled the nonverbal features, and we'll go through how to do that in a little bit. So how do I turn my video on or off, or mute or unmute myself? It's really important to be muted if you're not the person who's speaking at the time, because any background noise is going to bring your video to the front and can also be distracting for the rest of the meeting. So you're going to see again on your control bar, it'll say mute, start, stop video. So you can just click on that, and once you see the red line across it, you'll see that you're either muted or your video is off. So that's again important if you're not the person that's speaking, just so you're not distracting the meeting and the people that are trying to speak, that people are trying to listen to as well. Another great feature is the chat. So we often get asked, how do I use the chat function? Beside your participant there on the control bar, you will see that chat function. When you click on that, there'll be a chat bar that comes up at the side of your screen. Anyone who's asking questions or giving information about who's talking is going to have their message appear there. You can see at the bottom, we've circled in red, it says to everyone. That means that every person in the meeting is going to see your message. You can change that to be to the host only. And if the host has allowed it, you can talk one-on-one with another participant in the meeting. If there's a comment that you want to see that's no longer visible in your chat bar, there will be a scroll bar. It is the most recent comment that shows at the bottom, and you can scroll up to see what the person above you may have said if that's something you're still looking for. Then we also get asked, how do I minimize my Zoom screen? So you may need to look at something else on your computer. If you're in full screen mode, you're just going to want to hit escape, and it'll make the window a little bit smaller. From there, as you move your mouse, you'll have a control bar at the top, and you can just hit the minimize button. That'll bring the screen to be a small square on your screen, as you can see here on the slide. From there, you can still mute or unmute yourself. You can start or stop your video. And if you want to bring that meeting back to full screen, you're going to use that square with the green arrow in it to reopen your Zoom screen to be full size again. So those are some great tips for if you are just participating. Next, we'll talk about some that are great for participants and hosts in meetings. One of the things that we often see in Zoom meetings is messy backgrounds. Messy backgrounds can be very distracting to the people that are watching you as you're speaking, or even if you're just a participant in the Zoom meeting. I was in one meeting and the woman had a mirror behind her, and in the mirror was showing her kitchen, which may not have been cleaned for a couple of months at that point. And while she was giving us some very good tips during the meeting, I could not take my eyes off of her messy kitchen, which can also be very distracting. So here's some background do's and don'ts. A lot of Zoom platforms right now are not allowing the virtual background. So if you don't have the option to have your virtual background, you still want to make sure you have good lighting so that people can see you. You want to avoid having windows behind you that are giving you that background glare and they're not able to see you properly. You want to have a clean space behind you. Have branding in the background. You can have things on your bookshelves or whatever with your company name, and keep it simple. Don't have distracting backgrounds. Don't move around too much, as that can also distract the person watching you. And wear the same color as your back. Do not wear the same color as your background, as then you blend in too much. So what should you have in your background? You should have a nice clean space that's not distracting for people to look at, so that they are paying attention to you and what you're trying to say. Next, we'll talk about if you're hosting a Zoom meeting. Zoom is new to a lot of people, so hosting a meeting, especially for the first time, can be very confusing. So for scheduling a meeting, the very best thing to do is do this through your browser rather than the Zoom desktop app. If you do try to schedule it through the Zoom desktop app, it's just going to redirect you to your browser, and it's going to make you log in again, which is just an extra step you don't need. When you log in on the browser, the first thing that you're going to see is your opening page with your profile. You're going to want to click on Meetings and then Schedule a Meeting. From there, you can enter all of your meeting details and then make sure to save that meeting so that it becomes scheduled. Next, we'll talk about how you adjust your meeting settings. Once you've adjusted the meeting settings, they do stay the same meeting to meeting. So you do not have to do this every single meeting. You would only have to go back in and readjust these if you want to change a setting for a specific meeting. So underneath there where you've set your meeting up, you're going to go into settings and you'll see the rest of the things we're about to talk about from that point forward. So how do I make somebody a co-host? To make somebody a co-host, it's easiest to do so during the meeting. Again, you'll go into your participant bar as we've shown you before. You're going to click on More beside that participant's name, the person who you want to make the co-host. And then you'll see this drop-down menu and you'll have the ability to make them a host or a co-host. How do I enable and disable the waiting room? The waiting room is a great feature for organizers. It gives you the ability to have only your speakers and panelists in the meeting to have a quick chat before letting everybody else into the meeting. It gives that more professional appearance rather than everybody seeing your beforehand chat that maybe they don't need to be a part of. It's also a great way for you to customize the waiting room, have your logo, any special instructions you may have for your participants, your start time, and your meeting description. So this is in your settings under security, and you'll see the toggle there to enable the waiting room and as well as to customize your waiting room. Once your meeting starts, you might wonder, how do I let people in from the waiting room? As soon as somebody tries to join your meeting, you'll see that pop up. where it says here, Casey Farley has entered the waiting room for this meeting. You then can either click Admit, or you can click See Waiting Room. You can also ignore that pop-out if you're not ready to let people in just quite yet. If you want to see your waiting room, you can either click on See Waiting Room or click Participants. You'll then see anyone who is waiting to enter your meeting. If you hover your mouse over the person's name, it'll give you the option to admit them or to remove them from the meeting. Once you have multiple people waiting, you'll also see Admit All at the top. So once you're ready to start your meeting and you want to let everybody in, you just simply hit Admit All and it'll start to let people in. A great thing to keep in mind is how to disable your waiting room once your meeting has started. If you do not disable your waiting room once your meeting has started, anyone who tries to join from that point forward will be stuck in the waiting room until you let them in. This means that you have to monitor your waiting room as you're trying to moderate your meeting, which can be complicated and leave people waiting for longer than you'd like them to. To be able to do this, you hit Participants again. You'll see ... in the bottom. The Enable Waiting Room will have a check mark beside it. Click on that, and it'll give you a pop-up saying you have disabled the waiting room. At that point, anyone who joins the meeting from that point forward will be admitted to the meeting right away without having to wait in the waiting room. How do I mute all participants? Even though generally we ask people to mute themselves during the meeting if they're not the one that's speaking, sometimes people forget to do so, or they may not know how. There's two ways to do this. Before the meeting, you can have in your settings, mute all participants upon entry. This means everyone will be muted when they enter the meeting, unless you give them the option to unmute themselves. Otherwise, during the meeting, you can go into your Participants tab, click Mute All, and it will silence all of the participants unless you unmute them. How do I enable and disable the chat? You may or may not want a chat feature during your meeting, depending on what the purpose of your meeting is. In your security settings again, while you're setting up your meeting, you're going to have allow participants to send messages to other participants. You can also allow participants to save the chat, which you may not want to do for privacy reasons, depending on what your meeting is about. You have the option if you want them to private message one-on-one to each other. And you have the option to auto-save the chat. This is a great feature as the host to have this chat automatically saved so that you have it for your records following the meeting. But again, this is an option you can choose or not choose. Next, we'll talk about the nonverbal features. So we talked about how to use these nonverbal features, but as the host, this is something that you would have to enable if you want your participants to be able to use it. You would do so, again, in your meeting settings, just by clicking the toggle to let the nonverbal features be apparent. How do I enable and disable the sharing feature? So you may or may not want to share screens. As you can see, we're sharing our screen right now. You again have to enable this in your settings, and you can allow either just the host or for the host and all participants to be able to share their screen, as well as control what can and cannot be shared just here in your features. So how do you share your screen? We've already gone into the features and we've enabled it. So now we're in the meeting, we're ready to share. What do? In your control bar, if you are the host, you will see Share Screen at the bottom. When the share screen comes up, you're going to click on Share Screen. As you can see, we've highlighted in red. Most importantly, if you're sharing a video, you want to note these two bars at the bottom: Share My Computer Sound and Optimize My Screen Sharing for Video Clips. If you do not click to share your computer sound, when your video starts playing, your participants will not be able to hear the audio. Generally, if you're sharing a video, you want them to hear this, so you just want to make sure that those two things are clicked there. You're then going to hit share, and your participants will be able to see your screen. How do I use a whiteboard? The whiteboard feature is great if you're doing things especially like brainstorming or trying to share diagrams during your meeting. So we're doing this in a very similar fashion. Share screen, but click on the whiteboard feature and then click share. You can see here what the whiteboard looks like and what some of the controls are that you're able to use while you're using a whiteboard during your meeting. How do I enable and disable polling? Polling is a fantastic feature, especially if you're trying to get feedback or have people voting during a meeting. So you're going to enable your polling in your settings in the meeting's basics. But then how do I create a poll? I want to make sure I can ask the right questions. In the meetings area, once you've enabled polls, you're going to put in your question. You can put the answers in, and then make sure that you add the question. At the bottom, you can see as well, you can add multiple questions here. So we've got some great polls set up, but now we're in our meeting. How do we share those? If you have enabled the polls, you will see the poll tab there on your control bar. When you click on that, it'll give you the option of which poll you'd like to launch. You'll select your poll and click Launch Poll. You'll then see a timer letting you know how long your poll has been running. Click End Poll when you're ready to shut the poll down. If you want to share your results so that people can see what other people have voted, this is anonymous. They can't see who said what. But you're just going to click the Share Results, which will now be visible at the bottom. And you'll click Stop Sharing when you're ready to stop sharing that poll with other people. Another important feature is recording. Many people want to record their meeting so that they have the option to look back at it after the meeting is finished. You can do this by enabling it in your settings. You can set it up to automatically record, or you can hit the record button in the bottom on your control bar during the meeting. You can also select if you want this to record to the cloud or to your local drive on your computer. The last feature we're going to talk about is the breakout rooms. In some meetings, you may want to put people into individual groups to chat with each other during the meeting or to brainstorm. To do this, again, you're enabling that feature in your meeting settings. You'll see the breakout room button at the bottom of your toggle screen. You can either preset who goes into rooms before the meeting. You can assign people individually manually during the meeting, or by hitting automatic, it'll randomly select who goes into which breakout room. So depending on what the purpose of your breakout room is which one of these features that you might want to use. If you still need help, Zoom has amazing online support. If you go just to Zoom support, they have the answers to most of your frequently asked questions, as well as much more information on the topics we've covered and some that we haven't. Now, you're Zoom masters too. Thank you.
Thanks, Casey, and thanks for giving us all that great information on how we can actually use Zoom and become a Zoom master. So now let's move into our discussion with our lawyers and property managers. And Patricia, I think you're going to start us off and talk to us about different types of meetings and some of the preliminary issues that we need to think about. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Patricia.
Great. Thanks very much, Sonia. Good to be with you all. And I must make a shout out to all the moms that might be watching, or people that are looking on to these younger generations and starting to see them all participate with us willingly. So thanks for being here on the panel today. So condominium corporations are not at risk of contracting COVID-19 and are statutorily obligated to continue operating. Over the last few months, the condominiums have had to practically implement operations in, around, and in respect of COVID. So in all our meetings, and that's what we're here to talk about, we should set our intentions high around success and satisfaction. And for many of my boards, this is what it means. Understanding what the meeting is for and why we're calling it, focusing on integrity in the meeting process through transparency and checks and balances, compliance with the Act, because the law has been designed to bring integrity and consumer protection, addressing effectively and seamlessly all the key elements of the meeting structure and legal business of the meeting, keeping people safe mentally and physically, and managing the new normal, and ensuring people are heard from wherever they sit, producing a productive, trustworthy, and reasonably enjoyable event. These are all honorable goals, I think, that we can all strive for in this new reality. So a meeting is a gathering of people, and as Sonia has told us, there are real limits on the number of people that we can get together. So for our board meetings, because condos don't get COVID, life must go on, the condo board must think about how to continue to fulfill its duties and obligations pursuant to the Condominium Act, including ensuring that things like landscaping is completed, whether the pool should be opened or not, and other operational day-to-day matters. So electronic and telephonic meetings are doable, and they're efficient, safe, and effective for condo boards. Other types of meetings are owners' meetings, and owners' meetings are a go. AGMs must be held within the time frames adjusted by the government where applicable. They cannot be postponed or canceled, and they cannot be held via proxy votes. The meetings must be held with a full set of rights to vote or appoint a proxy to do the voting for you. Requisition meetings, meetings that are called by 15% of owners, must be held. And meetings for owners to ensure compliance with the Act, such as Section 97(4) approvals for a change to the asset of the corporation, must be held by the Board of Directors to ensure compliance. As well, we're seeing more meetings to approve bylaws. One of the more exciting bylaws on the table these days is the electronic meeting and electronic voting bylaw, which was discussed at a prior CCI Huronia webinar. After May 31st, 2021, you will not be in a legitimate place to hold a virtual meeting or collect votes electronically without that bylaw. But just remember that that bylaw has a lower threshold for approval. So for directors meetings and unit owners meetings, they're all a go, pandemic or not. For the board, I think what you need to think about is, what if the unit owners don't want to have a meeting? Should you do run-throughs of your meetings? Which platform should you use? What happens if you don't host your HCM this year? Campaigning protocols and proxies may be an issue. And what if there's no electronic agreement with the unit owners? So these are all things we're going to talk about through our guests today and our speakers. And so just remember, while there's been flexibility in the timelines and the methods of holding meetings in Ontario, the obligation to hold a meeting still exists. And with that said, please remember that quorum requirements can change by virtue of where the statute is now under Section 50 for calling of certain meetings, and when they're called a second time and when they're called a third time. And as well, that there is case law out there that talks about quorum requirements for specific types of business. So that talks just generally about the types of meetings and sets the stage for our speakers and what they're going to talk about today. And I think I'm just going to jump right into the pre-meeting outline as well, because before we get to actually jumping into a meeting, like everything, planning is the key to success here. And we want to have successful meetings. So thinking through this, we need to think about elements for meetings held virtually today. I've talked about the extensions and flexibility, but without a pandemic, we also need other things in place. We need an agreement with the owner to be able to communicate with them electronically. There is a prescribed form of agreement that can be used in this regard. I find that it lacks certain elements that should be addressed with respect to managing information, so you may want to have counsel look at that for you. We also need to have a bylaw in place to permit electronic voting in the holding of a meeting. So get the bylaw passed if you do not have it during these times. Chances are meetings will continue to be virtual in the future, and even in virtual and in person. There will be the evolution of the hybrid meeting, so it's better to be prepared. So then there are elements in talking about service providers, which our guests are going to speak about, and other elements getting organized, like the preliminary notice, the notice of meeting, and the actual packet. And then I hope as our speakers go through, they're going to talk to us about practical good communication strategies being essential to working through the phenomena of virtual meetings. And a big thanks to Casey for her intro and helping everybody understand how virtual meetings work. So I think what we're going to get into right now is having each of our speakers, JJ, Nancy, and Shauna, talk about various types of forms of hosting and talk about the context of preparing for the meeting in the context of those meeting formats. So who wants to start? Should we have JJ start?
Sure, I can start.
Full
No
service?
problem. Yeah.
Thanks.
So when it comes to virtual AGMs, most of my experience has been working with full service hosts who offer virtual meeting moderators as well as a voting platform. So working with these companies can be handy because they take care of sending out the notices to owners, the counting of the votes, and are present at the meeting to act as a moderator in between the board and the owners. However, it can sometimes be confusing to owners as they are now receiving emails from a company outside of their usual management provider. So because these emails can be a little bit confusing for owners coming from another source, I find it's very beneficial that before any of the owners' packages go out, you send a notice out to your unit owners letting them know to expect an email on this date from this email address so that they know that they're expecting to get their AGM package virtually this year. Otherwise, they may not think to check their junk mail or their trash to make sure that the emails don't get deleted. After owners are aware that the emails will be coming from the host of the meeting, the host requires an owners list that includes all of the owners of the units, their email addresses, and if they've opted in for electronic correspondence. This way, the host can organize their email blasts prior to sending out the pre-notice of meeting. The pre-notice of meeting is then prepared in the management office, the same way that we would normally prepare it for an in-person AGM. This notice is then sent off to the host, who will email it out to all of the unit owners who are now hopefully anticipating receiving the pre-notice of meeting virtually. At this point, the owners will be able to complete a director's disclosure form, either through the meeting host electronically, or they can also send a hard copy into the management office as they normally would, and all of this information will be included in the notice of meeting package. Just like the pre-notice, the notice of meeting package is prepared within our office, and then it once again sent out to the host to distribute. When the host distributes this notice, they'll include detailed instructions on how the meeting will work, which includes a link to the meeting, as well as a link to the voting, which is specific to their unit. That voting link will only be sent to one email address for the unit, and it is how they keep track of ensuring that each unit only gets one vote. Any hard copy proxies can also be sent through the same way they normally would be. They can be sent to management, and those will be sent over to the host and will be included in the voting as well. I think for the most part, that covers what we do before the meeting for a full service hosting. So I think I'm going to pass the floor over to Nancy, who's going to talk about the do-it-yourself version.
Thanks so much, JJ. Okay, so for the do-it-yourself version, it's really key to make sure you have in advance decided who is going to be the chair of the meeting, who is going to be the host of the meeting, and ensure that you have the management company involved. And that's because we're trying to, as best as possible, simulate the in-person meeting. So we do the preliminary notice in the same manner that we typically would. The manager sends it out, with the exception of including in that preliminary notice, mention that the meeting is going to be held on a virtual platform, namely Zoom, in conjunction with a SurveyMonkey platform or other voting platform that you may choose to use. We'll talk about how you use the SurveyMonkey platform later on in our discussion today, but for the preliminary notice package, you have to make sure that they know it's virtual and that there's a voting platform. The next step then is going to be your actual notice of meeting. And Sonia, if you wouldn't mind sharing that draft notice that we've prepared. This is a cover letter that we provide to managers for it to be included in the meeting package, which explains the process for a do-it-yourself or a management company or a lawyer company hosted virtual meeting. We know there are several management companies in Ottawa that are using this type of a format, where you have the host being the management company with the lawyer the chair. There's also some firms that are doing the lawyer as hosting and chairing. In that particular case, you'd have the lawyer as the chair and somebody else in the firm acting as your host. So Sonia, are you able to share that particular document at this stage? There we go. Okay. So as you can see here, this is essentially a cover letter that you'd include in your package that sets out the procedure and informs owners of how they're going to participate in the meeting. It provides you with well, first of all, it tells you when the meeting is, of course, what the date is. Then it provides you with the attendance options. You can either participate by video conference or by telephone. You can plan to attend by proxy and video conference or telephone, and it explains the pros and cons of each of them and what your voting options will be depending on the type of attendance option you choose. Then it tells you how to pre-register for the meeting, breaking it down into video or phone attendance, just phone attendance, or by way of a proxy. One of the key things that you need to do for the registration portion is make sure you have one designated person as your contact for registration. You don't want some of the registrations going to the management company, some going to the host, and some going to legal counsel. That's far too confusing. So in my particular case, we always send them to my assistant, Julie, and she's the keeper of all proxies, registration, etc. You also want to make sure people understand that if they're attending by phone, they will be able, in this particular way, you'll be able to attend by phone, you'll be able to raise your hands, ask questions, and you'll also be able to participate in live voting by way of SurveyMonkey if it happens at that particular meeting. Then you describe the voting options a little bit more in more detail, and you confirm that everything must be submitted by a certain pre-registration date. That is also key to organizing your meeting. What we do is we prepare a chart in advance of the meeting so that we know who's attending in person, who's attending by proxy, and who's attending by proxy, or sorry, in person, but has already voted by proxy. That allows us to carefully track all of the key features that we're going to talk about later on during the meeting, making sure nobody gets 2 votes, making sure we've accounted for proxy voting, etc. So we always set our deadline a minimum 24 hours in advance. If it's a Monday, we try and do it on a Friday. If we're having a Saturday meeting, we try and do it on a Thursday so that I don't have my host having to work Friday night. Think in advance of when you want that pre-meeting deadline to get all of your information there in advance of the meeting. A couple more other key tips that you need to think about is in your notice package on that particular form, we also include a little paragraph that pre-selects the chair and the scrutineer. It confirms that the chair will be such and such legal counsel or manager, and the scrutineer will be such and such host, legal company, or management company. It asks for any objections to the appointment of the chair and scrutineer in advance so that they can be dealt with prior to the meeting. Because as we know, and we'll talk about later on in the meeting section, designating your scrutineers can be a little bit of a challenge as well. Just going to see if there's anything that I've missed. I think those are the key things. Oh, no, one more thing. At least one week in advance of the meeting, so about halfway between obviously sending out your notice package and the meeting date, my assistant will also check my numbers, see where I'm at for quorum, see how many proxies we've received, see how many registrations we received. And then we send out a pro forma suggested message to whoever is assisting us, whichever management company is assisting us, in sending out the preliminary notice and the notice of meeting, and saying, okay, send this reminder out to all your owners. It's very short. It takes the key functions from that notice package and just says, please contact Julie to make sure you get registered, or whoever else your host is going to be, and make sure you get registered for that meeting. So far, we actually haven't had a meeting without quorum, and in most cases, I'd say we're far exceeding the numbers from last year. And last night, for example, we had, the past 2 nights, we've had more than 50%, so we should have been passing some great bylaws. That's the things you need to think about for before the meeting from a customized DIY perspective. I think it's over to Shauna now.
Yep. So I guess I'm not going to go into as much detail just because you guys covered pretty well everything as far as the actual nitty gritty when it comes to AGMs, when it comes to the customized version versus the full service hosting. I'm kind of in the middle. So basically the difference is that I'm coordinating all of the aspects of it as a property manager who's kind of doing it my way, but making sure that we're still meeting those requirements. What makes it kind of a hybrid option is, of course, I'm using resources to assist me in coordinating these things. We have been using a moderator with Canadian Webinar Services ourselves, and that's been really key in kind of getting us on track with the virtual side of things. But then everything else kind of goes back to the way that we had normally set up AGMs. We're just trying to adapt that to more of a virtual setting. So one of the things that I like to do when I have the opportunity to make it more customizable, as far as when I'm dealing with my actual boards and my residents. So I'm still their key contact, just as I am with any other matters that they have to bring to my attention. But you know, there's that level of comfort where they deal with me, so they know to come to me to ask me these questions, and to kind of try to adapt to this new way of doing things. One of the big things for me is obviously reassuring the board that it's going to be okay. We're going to get there. We're going to figure this out. We're going to apply this to more of a virtual kind of way of doing things, but sometimes they're not as comfortable with that because they've never done it before. So having that relationship is really important, and ensuring that they understand that this is, you know, this can be applied. We just got to kind of get through some of the tougher parts before we get there. So some of those things can be making our owners understand exactly how it is that they can participate, And so what I've been able to do is adapt my virtual meeting document to the demographic of that corporation. So ensuring that, if I have an older demographic, really breaking it down in layman's terms and making sure that they understand exactly what it is that they can do, and then encouraging that feedback. I send lots of reminders, so it's a lot more labor intensive because you're doing all of the communicating. So you have to make sure that when you are speaking with the person who is inquiring about how is this going to apply to me and how am I going to be able to participate, that you're customizing those options to what they're comfortable with. So that communication is really, really important. And just keeping it simple. You're not going to go into, Zoom options and that sort of thing when you know that they only have the option to participate via telephone. So just making sure that you're catering that to that owner and that board's needs. And then I send lots of email reminders. I keep track of it's about ensuring that you keep track of the registrations that are coming in and ensuring that you're responding appropriately. If you have a lot of really good response and you're surprised, then of course it's great to have that. But that as you approach the day of the AGM, those reminders have to kind of keep going, especially in a situation where people may not be as comfortable. They know they're not just walking into an AGM like every other year. So it's really important that you facilitate that communication and ensure that they understand what's going on and how does the normal AGM setup apply in a virtual setting. So how is it that you're going to receive my proxies? And how do my proxies apply to a virtual meeting? These are types of questions that I've received and I'm giving people answers to in this virtual setting. One of the big things, check your junk mail. That's one of the problems that we've been dealing with ourselves, where owners have been having trouble actually getting the information that they need. And I like to take this opportunity to, it's beneficial to get to know your owners even more, because you're having the opportunity to deal with them one-on-one and figure out exactly what's working and what's not. So we've had some good meetings and some bad meetings, which we're going to talk about later, but some really surprising results with having that one-on-one feedback with the residents when you are that main coordinator of the meeting. So that's just kind of the overall. I didn't go into crazy detail, but it's kind of in the middle of JJ and Nancy.
Thanks, Shauna. And you really stress an important point in terms of the whole pre-meeting procedure, which both JJ and Nancy and Patricia highlighted as well, is that communication is really key at that point. And you're going to need to do probably more communication than you would for an in-person meeting, because this is all new to somebody that hasn't had to do a virtual meeting yet. So I'm going to leave some thoughts with you, Shauna, that maybe you can answer when we get to the end of the webinar and we get some tips from all of you about communication and how important it is, and what kind of things do you do to try and parallel the communication with the virtual meeting to what people would have expected in the in-person meeting, and what more communication do you need to do. So we've got some great tips and some great advice in terms of how to plan it from the pre-meeting, and now we're going to actually move to the day of the meeting and the meeting itself. So Patricia, do you want to start us off?
Sure. And here we are. We're at the day of the meeting. All this preparation is coming to fruition. We don't know if it'll be a great meeting or what kind of meeting it'll be. But like every AGM, in person or otherwise, the day of the meeting is an important day in and of itself, not just the time of the meeting. So, we're going to ask our participants now to comment in their actual areas of being, an in-between kind of process, a hybrid process, or a customized process, or a full service process, how to address these issues. The first is making sure that you know who's supposed to be at the meeting and that they're actually eligible to be there, and how that's complicated in the virtual reality. And the second item that came to mind for me was talking about how do you make sure that your speakers are good to go? How do you give people that level of comfort, and who could potentially be your speakers at the actual meeting that's going to occur later on? So why don't we start with JJ, and if you have any other thoughts on the day of the meeting from your perspective with a full service provider, do add those in.
So day of the meeting, when it comes to your owner's list and letting the host know who's in arrears, we are lucky in the sense that the host already has your owner's list. So they already know who should be at the meeting, what their email address is, and how they should be attending. So myself, what I've been doing is I run the arrears list day of the meeting, and then I am sending any unit owners that should not have a vote, I'm sending that email off to the service provider so that they are aware of who should be voting and who shouldn't be voting the day of. When it comes to the prep work, one of the great things of working with these service providers is that they do offer you basically a dry run before the meeting. So about an hour before the meeting, they have all of your panelists. So that would include board members, auditors, lawyers, the manager, whoever's chairing the meeting. Everyone is welcome to come in and have about a half-hour dry run where they explain in detail how the voting will work, how all of the panelists can speak. The panelists have the option of, they are actually the only people at the meeting who can unmute themselves. So all of the unit owners will be muted, but the panelists can jump in and add any information in that they would want to at that time. I find it makes the boards feel a lot more comfortable. They go in, they're warmed up, they know exactly what's going to happen, and the moderators really are good at making the boards feel comfortable with how the meeting is going to go before we get started.
Thanks, JJ.
No problem.
So Nancy, what are your thoughts?
So we do a similar process to what the full service hosting would do. We have the owners list in advance. We have a list of the resident versus non-resident owners, and then we get the updated arrears list the day of as well. All of that information would have been prepared the 24 hours in advance, which is why we required the 24-hour pre-registration period, just to give us that extra time so we can be prepared for the day of. The process that we've been following is a little bit different. We do the webinar format as well, but we do allow all of our owners to come in eventually as panelists. We start them off as attendees, and one by one, we bring them up as panelists as our third level of registration scrutiny. So once we've confirmed their ability to attend, we bring them in as a panelist, and then throughout the meeting, they'll have the opportunity to mute or unmute themselves or have their cameras on. And of course, this depends on whether the size of your meeting as well. For a meeting under 150 people, we found it's okay. Over 150, maybe you don't want to use that particular process and you want to keep them just as attendees. But what we have found is that allowing owners to have the option to turn their camera on really gives an engaged feeling to the meeting. We've had people leaving saying, wow, I loved this. It was fantastic. I felt engaged. So by bringing people up as panelists, allowing them to have their camera on, you've confirmed their registration, made it secure, and given them an opportunity to be a bit more engaged if that's your desire. We also put the unit numbers, of course, in with the names, similar to the host provider. And we put both unit numbers in there if someone owns multiple units. If we have 2 attendees from one unit, we keep one as an attendee so that we only count one person there in attendance. So we have a couple of little tips and tricks in using that particular process if anybody is interested in it that we can talk more about later on. But that's what we do for our registration. And we do the rehearsal, of course. Depending on the demographic, we offer it a week in advance. If we're nervous about cameras, microphones, if we are nervous that board members might want to go out and get a little bit of extra tech help before the meeting, we'll do it in a week in advance. If everybody's pretty comfortable, we'll do it the night of, about an hour before.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. Shauna, what are your reflections on the day of the meeting?
It's pretty well the same as what JJ and Nancy covered. Obviously, the proxy aspect is a big one for our meetings, just because we're the ones coordinating all of that as well. So doing all of that legwork the day of to ensure that we have accurate and up-to-date numbers, and to also be conscious of when people do come in, to keep tabs on, you know, who's logged in, and if, like Nancy said, if there's multiple unit owners residents in one unit, or if they own multiple units, to keep that in mind when they are being brought into the actual meeting itself. And I think there's some of the items that JJ and Nancy brought up are really good, and I'm taking notes too. So this is really great learning for me as well.
That's great. Thanks, Shauna. So let's jump right into, now we're at the brink of the meeting, and so we want to talk about a variety of issues, and I'll just give our audience a quick run through of the things that we're going to talk about. And what I'll do is that I'll ask you to speak to each item on the list. We're going to talk about the registration process at the time when people are coming into the room, confirmation of the notice of meetings, the confirmation of quorum, appointment of scrutineers, nominations from the floor, conducting the election, voting and revoking proxies, secret ballots versus raising hands and using polls with weighted proxies, and the use of question and answer and the chat function. So let's start with the easy part. And JJ, what do you think about, in terms of your format, the full service, the registration process? How does that roll?
So definitely one of the advantages of using a full service host. All of the residents who want to participate in the meeting have registered in advance. So registration is completed by the host via email prior to the meeting starting. Generally, depends on the host. Sometimes they say you need to be registered about 24 hours in advance. Some are 48 hours. But they really take care of all the registration and make sure only the unit owners who are permitted to vote do get a voting opportunity. So they do take care of most of that for us.
And maybe let me ask you this now. And do people revoke their proxies at this time to, let's say, change them to ballots?
They can change them to ballots, and the host does make sure of that as well. If we do receive proxies from a unit prior to the meeting and then they do notice that they've registered for the meeting, they do make sure that only one of their votes is counted there, and they do have the opportunity to vote live at the meeting if there are any changes or nominations from the floor. So.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying. So, Nancy?
Mm-hmm. So I'll just add, I guess, I'll add just a little bit to what I was saying before. So when we do the promoting to panelist, from attendee to promoting to panelist, that's when we triple check our registration. Everybody will have registered in advance, so we'll have the complete list at least 24 hours in advance, sometimes 48, depending on if it's a weekend or a Friday. So we'll have that complete registration list broken down by who's attending only for virtual and voting live, who's attending only by proxy, and who is attending live but has previously voted by proxy. So we'll have all that broken down in a separate chart. And this is why it's crucial to have a chair and a host, right? Because you want to make sure the host is taking care of that side and not the chair. You can't do it all in one fell swoop. When we have a meeting that's over 300 people, we have 2 hosts, in fact, to make sure that everything is taken care of really well on the back end. With respect to the revocation of proxies, or revocation of voting, we do allow that right up until the time of the live ballot. So if you've submitted your proxy in advance and then you've changed your mind during the election of directors, by voting live, you revoke that previous proxy with the election. And because everything is tied to the email address, we're able to cross-reference relatively quickly whether or not you have revoked your proxy by voting live, to make sure, as JJ said, that we only have 1 vote per unit.
Thanks. And Shauna, how does it differ in the hybrid world?
Well, it's not that different. It's just who does it. And that's usually myself and with some assistants at the office. And it's right up to the meeting. We want to, ensure that we have, they can register right up until just before the meeting. And of course, once we have the attendance report, we cross-reference that with the proxies received. I like to prepare myself and ensure that I have a really clear Excel sheet with all of the information, and I update it as I receive registrations as well as proxies. Also proxies and who they're assigned to. A lot of the times they assign them to a board member. And so going into the meeting, knowing how many votes that board member will have, or that proxy holder will have, is really crucial in that voting process as well.
Right. Thank you. That's important. So another important element of our meetings is actually confirmation that notice has gone out. Sometimes we roll through these scripts and we don't think anything of them, but these are one of the important elements. So how do you, in the management role, or Nancy in chairing, how do you ensure that that's covered?
Well, I can jump in if you want to start, or yeah, I wasn't
yeah,
sure.
sure. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, no, it looked like
Go
I
ahead.
wasn't hearing you for a sec, JJ, so I wasn't sure if I was supposed to start. Yeah, so I'll start off with that one. It depends on, I guess, who's going to be doing what role. In many of our condos in Eastern Ontario, the manager does a statutory declaration. And so they'll provide that to us in advance, and we'll put the statutory declaration up on screen and also say that owners can have a copy of it thereafter. If we don't get a statutory declaration, then we'll just confirm the dates on which they were sent out and call for any questions or concerns from the floor and ask for that by show of hands.
Okay, great. Thank you. Shauna, JJ, anything different that you would add?
No, for full service, it's just about the same. The host actually generally sends you a confirmation of quorum email. So they make sure that that's sent over and you're good to go.
Yeah, and
and that segues us. Yeah, Shauna, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, that's great. No, great.
In my situation, that's something I actually keep track of live as I'm going through the meeting, and then of course it's confirmed following it. So that's part of the labor-intensive part, is really keeping track of that stuff and making sure it's accurate.
Okay, and that would be confirming that quorum is maintained throughout the meeting and that you have quorum. So do you all confirm quorum at the beginning of your meeting in the virtual platforms that you work in?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
JJ, okay. Nancy and Shauna.
Yeah, we break
and
it
that's
down.
Also an important element.
And we also break it down in person or by proxy, right? Because you have to know how many you have in person, how many you have by proxy, and then later on, obviously, if there's any revocations of the proxies, you're going to want to have those numbers at the end, because you have to have an auditable trail in case people want to go back and take a look at those votes.
Well, you bring up a good point, which is on our list of things to talk about, but which is really the types of proxies as well. In your different types of formats, under the proxy form, we have 3 different types we could actually get. How do each one of you manage that different data? Maybe JJ, we'll start with you, full service, then Shauna, and then Nancy.
So for the full service, when you get the actual electronic proxies back, they're using the actual hosting service. The host takes care of that and makes sure that votes are allocated to the right people. When it comes to getting a hard copy proxy, it is a little bit more difficult. We do have to make sure that the votes are allocated to the right people, and we do have to communicate a bit more with the host and ensure that, for example, if someone gives their vote to the president of the corporation, that we make sure that vote is still counted. So that one does take a little bit more back and forth between management and the hosting and the host of the meeting.
Yeah, and on my end, that's one of the things that I upload into my Excel sheet is I have the assigned proxy and what their proxy represents for each one received, and so that contributes to my final counts. And of course, any revocations would void some of that information as well.
Yeah, and our process is pretty much exactly what Shauna described. So any live revocations, we would cross-reference back to the email addresses that are attached to how many proxies that particular person has, as per the fantastic Excel spreadsheets that we can't live without these days.
Excellent. Okay. So there are other pieces of technology and information. Yeah, go ahead, Shauna.
There's a bit of a delay, so I keep cutting people off. So no, and what I like to do too is I actually share my Excel sheet on my Google Docs with my moderator so that he can see live the updates as I'm doing them.
And that's a great point and a great share, because that brings that transparency element and keeps everybody on the same page, which is always a good thing. Nancy's even talked about when we have significant number of units that there are 2 hosts just to quarterback to make sure everybody's on the same page. So thanks for sharing that. Another point in the meeting is appointing scrutineers. And Nance, I think you've already touched on this. Do you want to start us off on just how you do that process, and then Shauna, and then JJ?
Yeah, so the easiest approach is probably what we see 99% of the time, which is we will put in the notice of meeting the following host, the following person, the following company will be the scrutineer for the meeting. Similarly, the following chair will be the chair for the meeting. We put that right in the advanced meeting package, ask for any objections within a specified time. Hopefully you get no objections, all goes well. the day of the meeting, at the very beginning, you'll confirm, as per the notice, the chair is such and such, as per the notice, the scrutineer is such and such, and away you go. However, as we all know, not every condo is smooth as silk. Some corporations really are insisting in still having a live scrutineering process. They really want that, and they feel comfortable with that. So what we can do is we can appoint a live scrutineering process to happen the next day. And in that case, you have to make sure everybody's aware that the vote results won't be confirmed until the next day. So you can appoint scrutineers during the meeting, have them join you by way of a Zoom session the following day, sharing the proxies on the screen, going through the votes one by one, and confirming your results the next day. You can also, if your circumstances permit, gather, as long as there's only a few of you, 3 or 4 of you, with masks. I did this yesterday actually, with masks, hand sanitizer, gloves, in a massive party room. There were 4 of us, and went through 200 and some proxies to confirm the vote. So that can be done as well if people really do want to have live scrutineering. For my experiences, it's been less than 2% that are doing that. Majority are just doing the electronic scrutineering, which is great.
Shauna?
Yeah.
In the hybrid.
So we've pre-assigned scrutineers, and generally that involves management and the moderator, and we will usually announce that at the beginning. And of course, if there are any objections, we'll definitely keep that in mind and try to adapt, but we haven't run into that yet, and it's been working for us.
Thank you. JJ?
For the full service meetings, so the host actually generally acts as the scrutineer. Since they've been receiving all the proxies and all the votes electronically, that seems to be working out well for us as well so far.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's get to some exciting stuff. Conducting the election, the big one that, we need to get it right the first time. So JJ, how are the conducting of elections going with the full service package?
So with the full service package, there is always the nominations that we've received prior to the meeting. So they're included in the package. They've been voted on electronically. There's no problems there. What happens is, often, as we know, at the meeting, we will get some nominations from the floor. So when we receive the nominations from the floor, what the hosts that I've been working with have been doing is they resend out another voting link. So they send out this new voting link to all of the unit owners who are currently participating in the meeting. And those unit owners will get that link to the email address that they have on file. So we have found we've had some issues with some people have their Zoom accounts, for example, set up with their work email addresses. So they do have to make sure that they're checking the right email addresses to be getting those updated voting links. And they've been able to vote on any new owners that have decided to nominate themselves from the floor there.
Okay, thank you. And Shauna?
I have been lucky enough in the few virtual AGMs that I've done that it's been by acclamation. But we've been prepared for that. And in that situation, we have smaller groups, so it's been easier to manage, and people are generally patient with us. But we'll generally put up a new poll. Of course, their name isn't on the proxy, so there's that to consider as well. But for the people who are participating in the meeting, they have the opportunity to vote via Zoom.
Okay. Nancy?
So this is where the SurveyMonkey tool, we've started using this. We've been using it since about May, I think, and we found it to be quite effective, actually. The only problem with the SurveyMonkey tool is that it doesn't tend to like Hotmail. So we have a backup option just in case somebody's Hotmail account doesn't work. But it is really important to make sure everyone's checking their junk. So how it would work, we do the typical nominations from the floor, just like in an in-person meeting. If we have an additional candidate from the floor, we have the SurveyMonkey tool open on our desktop. We add the new person in nice and quickly. And then as soon as all the candidates are closed, we send the SurveyMonkey vote out pretty much like a full service provider does, right? Just by using the email addresses. Actually, I did one with a couple with the full service providers the past couple of nights. And so I've noticed that the time lag between the SurveyMonkey and the full service seems to be quite similar, which is great. So as soon as the motion for the nominations of candidates is closed, we hit send, on the SurveyMonkey because it takes 3 to 4 minutes for everybody to get it in their emails. And so while people are doing their speeches, while candidates are doing the speeches, it gives everybody time for that email to get into their inbox. The votes come out nice and quickly, which is great using this particular tool. And so in the background, our particular host person, whether it's my paralegal, the clerk, assistants, our whole firm, has gotten involved in this. They'll be tallying those votes, cross-referencing it with the proxy, etc. So we can do nominations from the floor. You just have to be really well prepared, as Shauna was saying. You have to have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted in advance to know exactly what you have to work with so you can do it live quickly.
That's great, Libby. Thank you, and for taking us through that. I'm looking at the time, and we're moving quite quickly. There's so much to learn on this, and in each of the sort of formats. So I'm thinking what we should do is maybe jump down to talking about using polls with weighted proxies. Can we address that issue quickly and then go to our next part in our discussion?
Sure.
Who wants to take that one? Nancy, do you want to start?
Sure, I can jump in, yeah. If you have relatively straightforward questions, like you've got your approval of the minutes, well, I guess every now and then that can be contentious too, you never know. But if you've got uncontentious approvals of the minutes, uncontentious appointments of the auditor, those types of votes you can easily do by way of a poll because you don't have to worry about weighting your results, right? Because in a poll, you don't know, at the time, you don't know who's cast what vote. About 15 minutes after Zoom closes, you do get all of your printouts. You get a printout of every single vote cast by way of the poll in the Zoom session, which is great. So there's your audit trail for all of your votes. But you can't do that live. So if at any point in time in your meeting, you do need to use the weighted proxy vote. So for example, if you have a contested vote on the minutes, you will have to revert to another tool, whether it's not a secret ballot using raise your hand and then weighting them according to the proxies by raise your hand, or whether it's reverting to your other voting technique, whether it's SurveyMonkey or full service vote. So you really have to be careful that if you have a contested issue, recognizing that your polls won't give you real-time weighted value.
Thank you. That's important. Shauna, JJ, what do you think?
So I actually haven't had an issue yet where I've had to use a poll. So I don't have a ton of experience on this one. I do know that some of the hosts have given us the option that if we do need a poll, they can pull it up and they can put the question in quickly, and we can get that sorted out and organized fairly on time. But I actually haven't had to deal with it yet, so I don't have too much experience on that one.
Fair. And Shauna?
I'm right where JJ is, to be honest with you. I haven't had to coordinate that aspect of it. We've had some pretty agreeable meetings so far and things have gone well. So Nancy's probably the one with the most stories about where this would apply.
Well, and, I think we also have to revert back to all of our experience of in-person meetings where we have had those meetings now and again where things are contentious and we do have to take the time and delay the meeting. And, the great thing about the virtual meeting is you can actually be in your own unit and your own apartment, take a break from the meeting and come back when we reconvene. So you're in a space that you can actually use and access. So I think, Sonia, what we'll do is we'll go on to our next portion in terms of lessons learned. Did you want to jump there?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Patricia. And thanks to the four of you for sort of taking us through the meeting, the day of the meeting and the actual meeting itself. Listening to you, there's lots of stuff that has to be done and it takes a lot of coordination, but it definitely sounds like it's possible and we can make it work. So having had experience with these meetings, I'm going to ask JJ and Shauna in 2 minutes or less to either share their lesson learned from their best meeting or their lesson learned from their worst meeting. Sort of a takeaway that other people can sort of learn from what others have experienced. So JJ, why don't you start us off? What's the best lesson you've learned so far in doing these virtual meetings?
Yeah, so far I've probably participated in about maybe 15 virtual AGMs, and for the most part my experiences so far have been quite good. I would say that my best meeting I had was a pretty contentious meeting about discussion with a declaration change and some issues that the unit owners were we're not too happy about with this change. So I found that using the virtual format, it was perfect for this AGM because it was organized. Unit owners could only speak when they were unmuted, so they only had the opportunity to speak when they were permitted. There was none of the cutting each other off. Everyone was not interrupting each other, but by the end, everyone still felt that they got to voice their opinion. In the end, I got a lot of good feedback from the unit owners saying that they thought that the meeting was really good. They appreciated that they could be heard without necessarily being interrupted. So I do think that for a meeting that's a little bit more contentious, it really is a great option.
Yeah, you gotta love that mute button. Shauna, what's the lesson you've learned from either your best or worst meeting?
I think I have to think back to my first virtual AGM. It was a bumpy one, but I think it's a matter of understanding that we're all still trying to figure this out, right? And that was the first step into getting into understanding what it is that we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, lessons learned, that kind of thing. So it's important to focus on the positives. You know, this allows you to close up the distance between you and maybe your non-res owners, or maybe some of your younger demographic that are more comfortable with this type of format versus an in-person. And then I think a lesson learned in better preparation with the moderator who wasn't as well versed in this type of meeting, that being condos and AGMs, and ensuring that they've got all the information that they need so that we can work together to make sure it rolls out well. And then again, it's just a matter of saying, you know, understanding that it's going to be difficult for owners. You know, we had that AGM, it was a lot of owners who were, you know, they basically knew how to open up a book on a tablet. Like they really didn't know what's Zoom, what is this video, I don't understand, right? So it's one of those things where there was a lot of pushback, and when we kind of explained to them, it's either this or we don't have another option, and no, we can't go and stand out in the yard, you know, 6 feet away from each other and that kind of thing. It's just not feasible. You know, it was one of those things where people eventually came to terms with it. And we did get a lot of positive feedback from surprising owners as well. So it was really great to see kind of how that unfolded and what type of feedback it turned into. And there were some surprising results. And you know, the board still was skeptical because, you know, they know their neighbors very well, and they know what works and what doesn't for them, and they can be, you know, quite firm in the way that they want things to go. But this kind of pushed us in that direction, and I think it's opening up a door for sure for them to consider that more in the future.
Thanks, Shauna. I think that is a good lesson, is just don't be afraid to do it, and also be okay that it might not be perfect the first time. Everybody will get better the more we do it, and it's not something we should fear. All right, over to the condo lawyers. Here's a question I'm going to ask each of you to respond to. Advance voting. This is the big question that's always out there, and I know there's differing views between condo lawyers on this. So if we consider advance voting any voting before the meeting is called to order, not including proxies, can it be done? Who's going to take it first, Patricia or Nancy?
I think I'll start off because I think I'm going to start off with what scenario causes me concern. Because obviously, until a court rules one way or the other, we can debate this and until midnight, and we won't have an answer. So I'll tell you what concerns me the most is a vote that proceeds on a super contentious issue that is later challenged. Picture this: you're passing a bylaw for a multi-million-dollar loan, and the bylaw is passed using advance voting. And then later on, and the bylaw goes through, the voting or the loan is negotiated with the board, but you have a significant amount of owners who are not happy about this. And so they challenge that bylaw, saying that advance voting is not acceptable. And a court later on finds in favor of the owners who challenge it and determines that advance voting is not acceptable. Not saying that's the way it would go, but let's say it did. But the board has already borrowed that money, and the money may have started to trickle out. What do you do? Where does it leave you? So that's where I get concerned. And so if I have a contentious issue, I am not so sure I would be comfortable with advance voting on any contentious issues. I'd probably want to have all that voting done at the meeting.
Patricia, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not a fan of advanced voting in any form. I like to understand the parameters of my meeting and make sure that everything has it's transparent and there's no question about the integrity. I don't want there to be a misapprehension around what could have happened to ballots or to votes that were exercised. With that said, I also understand that there are people that can't always stay for the full meeting and they want to cast their votes and we're not there yet. And so to me, it's more about planning for that scenario in a way that the unit owner would feel comfortable providing a vote to be exercised on their behalf. Ideally, it's through proxy, in my opinion. And I agree 100% with Nancy. If it's a contentious issue, I don't want to open up any advance voting. I want it to be done at the time when it's supposed to be done. Because there are other elements to those votes that may occur during the meeting that unit owners should be aware of before they cast their votes.
Well, thanks, Patricia and Nancy, for your comments. And as Nancy said, I think we're going to have to wait to see how the courts rule on the advance voting.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be a case coming up sometime within the next year. There's going to be some contentious issue that's been voted on in advance. All right.
Well, it wouldn't be condo law.
Yeah. All right, so we're about 20 after 1. Before we wrap this up, we wanted to put some polls to you in the audience and have you participate as well. So our first poll is going up, and it's going to ask you 3 questions. Are you participating in virtual meetings? Yes or no? If you are you liking them? And if you are, would you hold a virtual meeting in the future, even if there was no pandemic? So cast your votes. They're coming in. Give everybody about another 30 seconds to cast their votes. We've got more than half people voting already, and then we'll share the results with everyone. Let's see what things look like out in condo land in terms of this issue. Interestingly, so far 93% of people are participating in virtual meetings, and 81% like it, and 74% will actually do it if there was no pandemic. Okay, I'm going to give everybody 5 more seconds, and then we'll close the poll and show the results.
Can I give Sonia 2 examples of the coolest things that I've heard from a virtual meeting on attending? One, the person was in Mongolia. And so there's not a chance they would have been able to attend, but for the fact it was virtual, which is really cool. That's the furthest one I've had so far. 2, an owner said it was the first time they've ever attended the AGM, having lived there for more than 20 years because they have serious mobility and health issues, and they could never attend the meeting. So they were thrilled at the opportunity to be able to attend their first AGM. So it's something for us to be thinking about.
Yeah, those are all great stories as to why we should be doing these AGMs virtually, even without a pandemic. So there are the results. 93% are participating in virtual meetings, 82% like them, 14% don't know, but there's definitely a vast majority of people are liking them, and 75% of people would actually hold a virtual meeting without a pandemic. So I think this poll sort of confirms what we've been experiencing ourselves, is that once people do it, they actually like it. So all the fears and all the reasons why we can't do a virtual meeting, they don't actually play out in real life. So if you're afraid of doing a virtual meeting, definitely give it a try. It seems to be quite successful for the vast majority of people. All right, here's our second poll. And the question is one question: do you have a bylaw passed to allow for virtual meetings and electronic voting? So let's see how many people have passed this bylaw yet. Votes are coming in. It looks like so far most people haven't. Hopefully that'll be on the agenda for your upcoming virtual meetings. Okay, give everybody about another 5 seconds. Got about 70% of the votes in. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share it. And the results are 65% of people have not passed the bylaw yet. 35% have. So it looks like there's still lots of work to do in terms of getting these bylaws passed. All right, so before we open the floor to questions, one last comment I'd like to get from all of the speakers. And that is, what is your tip that you're going to leave everybody with. So let's start with you, Patricia. What's your tip?
Not one size does not fit all. You have to know your community. You have to appreciate where they are. Some people are fearful of technology, so you need to help them and find other ways to fulfill your social needs. Because AGMs were often a gathering time for communities, so we have to figure out that element too.
Shauna.
Well, it's all about communication. It's really important to ensure that the information is clear, and it's clear in a way that the specific owner or board can understand. Make sure it's in layman's terms and you're not overdoing it with the legalese, and just do your best to make them comfortable with it. Understand that it's going to be a transition the first time around, but it's really going to get easier as you go.
Thanks. JJ?
I would say don't be afraid of virtual meetings. They're a great tool and can be a fantastic way to increase owner participation in your AGMs, as well as they can be a great method for keeping a controversial meeting civil, so everyone is participating equally. They can be kind of scary, but I've found that most of my boards that have had their virtual meetings have been really happy with how they went, and they've all been very successful. So,
thanks. Nancy?
If you're not having a full service provider, to make the evening of your meeting smoother, have a hotline person set up if you can, whether it's a board member, a volunteer owner, or another member of your staff. If you're the host, have a hotline number that people can call and say, I can't get on Zoom, I lost my link, I need an email, or just someone there that people can reach out to. Even if you can't fix them 100%, there's workarounds, and at least the person that someone can talk to, especially with an older demographic.
Thanks. Thanks, Nancy and Patricia, Shauna, JJ. This has been a great discussion about virtual meetings. We've got some great comments in the chat box about how great this presentation was. So thank you on behalf of CCI Huronia for joining us today. Also, thanks to Casey for joining us and telling us about Zoom. That was another great presentation. And I saw in the chat box, people are wanting a copy of Casey's PowerPoint, and they wanted a copy of the letter that Nancy referred to. So we are going to make those available as a PDF. If you are interested in obtaining a copy of either of those, please send an email to admin@ccihuronia.com, and then we will send those out to you. So that'll answer some of those questions that were in the box. We're going to open the floor up to questions now. So if you have a question for any of our speakers, JJ, Shauna, Nancy, Patricia, or Casey, raise your hand. We will unmute you and you can ask your questions live. Now's your opportunity to pick the brains of these amazing ladies that have joined us today. Do we have any questions from anyone?
I know we had questions in the chat. I'm just going back to see if we answered all of them.
Oh, we have a question here from Deanna. Deanna, I am going to, oh, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, is there a way, I may have missed this earlier, is there a way for telephone participants in the virtual meeting to do a poll or ask a question?
Casey, do you want to take that?
Sure. So with the telephone participants, if they're on a smartphone, they can participate in the polls. If they are on a touch tone phone, they can use the nonverbal features like the raising of their hands and the yes and no. But if there was a poll like the ones that Sonia did at the end of this meeting, they cannot see them or select the answer for those.
Is there a set process for what they key in to raise their hand?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Then verbally ask their question?
Yes, there are shortcuts for how to answer those questions. In the presentation, I did put those shortcuts on the bottom in the notes. So we can send that to you as well, and it shows you what the shortcut is from their touch tone. Or if you go onto the Zoom website and look for the shortcuts, there's a full list of them on the Zoom support site as well.
Yeah, and
thank you. Sorry about the barking dog there.
And for anyone on the call, if you have a question you're calling in, it's *9 to raise your hand, and then the other shortcut for on the phone is *6 to mute and unmute yourself. So If you are calling in, *9 to raise your hand. If you're logged in some other method, just press the raise your hand button and we will unmute you.
We had one question earlier, Sonia, about a hybrid in-person and virtual. We have done a couple of those, and it just means you need 2 hosts and 2 chairs, right? One live and one virtual, and you'll need your screen set up in the room where you're doing your live presentation, and you'll have to have a method of communication for the live chair, live host, and the virtual chair, virtual host, so that your counts can be done simultaneously if that's what you're aiming to achieve. Otherwise, your counts could be done and results announced the next day.
Thanks, Nancy. There's also a question in the chat about whether it's a good practice to hold a practice session for owners. So JJ and Shauna, have you found that to be helpful to hold practice sessions for owners?
We haven't done it. And I mean, I think if you provide them with enough guidance beforehand, you know, short of going in and, you know, installing the program for them and that sort of thing, I think it's more that aspect of it that they'd have trouble with. Other than that, it's a click of a button for the most part, right? So we haven't had to do that.
JJ?
Can you hear me? Sorry, I just got a notification that my microphone's not working.
It's getting better there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat as Shauna there. I haven't really had the opportunity to do a meeting with all of the unit owners. I do think if you have a smaller corporation, and that might be a good idea for sure, if it's something the board wants to assist with.
Now, just to add, we did have some boards that did meet the board before the AGM, just to give owners the opportunity. That did cause some issues because then there was some confusion when they did get to the AGM about the differences between the two and what to expect. So I think either way, it's going to be a learning curve, no matter which way you go about it.
Okay, thanks. Nancy and Patricia, did you have anything you want to add into that question?
We've had a couple. We've had a couple of groups where it's a large owner of older population who wanted to just get on and learn how to do Zoom. And so we've had some of our students just help with those sessions, and the people have enjoyed it. So they've done just a practice, you know, a couple weeks in advance, and then also helping them with their microphones, their videos if they want to turn them on, that type of a thing. And it's been helpful for those who have asked for it.
Okay, Patricia, any last words?
Yeah, the more interaction, the better. It's more about overcoming, you know, a lack of knowledge and perhaps fear, and the best way to do that is jump right in. So if we can facilitate it, it would be great, because then the meeting goes smoother. You know, people know what to expect. It's not all new.
Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, I think sometimes it alleviates the fear. So if you've got a community that has a lot of fear around it, practice session probably will help alleviate a lot of that fear. All right, well, I don't see any more hands raised, and it's 1:31, so I'm going to wrap things up. This has been a whirlwind of a webinar. There has just been so much information that you guys have shared. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, Casey, JJ, Shauna, Nancy, Patricia. We really appreciate all the time that you've taken to help plan this webinar, and the time you've taken today to actually share the knowledge that you have gained through doing virtual meetings. Also, thank you to our sponsors once again: Aaliyah Associates, Bayshore Property Management, Purcell Property Management, Integrity Property Management, and FCS Fire Consulting Services. Without your support, we could not be able to continue hosting these webinars and making them available to CCI members free of charge. So thank you again for your generous support. Just some upcoming events. Don't forget, our next Lunch and Learn webinar is on November 20th. The topic is insurance. And then we have our final one for the year on December 11th, which is maintenance and repair. All webinars start at 12. We go to 1:30. If you want to register, go to the CCIHuronia.com website and register online. As I indicated at the beginning of the webinar, a recording of today's webinar will be posted on our website, hopefully within the next 48 hours. Don't forget to join us on Facebook. If you're not on our email list and you want to get onto our email list to find out about all upcoming events and news releases that we try to make sure we keep our members up to date on, send an email to admin@ccihuronia.com and ask to be added to our email list. And then in terms of events across the province at various CCI chapters, CCI Golden Horseshoe has a condo talk on October 20th. They're going to be talking about the expansion of CAT Powers, so you can register online at their website, cci-ghc.ca. CCI National is hosting an insurance webinar on October 22nd. You can register on the cci.ca website. This is a national webinar, so there will be speakers from across the country talking about the insurance crisis. CCI Toronto is hosting a webinar on October 23rd called Division, Distrust, and Disruption, Condo Board Meetings Gone Awry. So you can register at the ccitoronto.org website. CCI National is hosting its first virtual conference on Saturday, November 7th. You can register at cci.ca, or there's a link that I've put into the chat box. You can just click the link and register directly. It's $40 for the full day. But you get $20 back as a gift card for lunch to order lunch. CCI Grand River is hosting their virtual conference November 20th and 21st. You can register on their website at cci-grc.ca. It's $50 for CCI members. CCI Eastern Ontario is starting their 4-part director's course on November 5th. You can register on their website, cci-easternontario.ca. And don't forget, any CCI Huronia events, you can always go to our website, ccihuronia.com, and check that out. Until next time, I'm Sonia Hodis, and from the entire CCI family to your family, wishing you a great weekend. Hope to see you next month on November 20th as we discuss insurance. And don't forget that CCI is your condo connection. Have a great day, everyone.